Hey guys, welcome to the Neglected Podcast. This podcast is not to change your mind, but to invite you into somebody else's narrative. This is a podcast to give a voice to the neglected. It is also an opportunity for all of us to engage.
Hi, Neglected Podcast listeners. This is your host, Jovanna Javis, and I am in the City Church studio with our great producer, Quinn. And our guest for today, we have Nicholas Seward with us here today. And so say hi to everybody.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about our conversation today. And so let's just go ahead and jump into it. I really appreciate you coming in and your willingness to share your story. So just tell me about you, where you're from, what you do for work, how long you've been in Savannah, those things.
So I was born in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
I moved to Savannah when I was 6, barely 7 years old. My grandmother raised me by herself from 5 weeks old, or mostly by herself, sorry. And when she remarried, my step-grandfather wanted to come home, and home was here in Savannah. Yeah. So that's how I ended up here in Savannah. Mm-hmm. And I worked several small jobs like most artists do, but I've studied and practiced photography since I was 7, mostly self-taught, but Philip, my step-grandfather, he was the photographer. He's the one who introduced me to photography. And it was kind of a battle at first because I found all of his gear and he's like, little boy, like stay away type of thing. And I was like, no, what's mine, what's yours is mine. And it went from there. I've taken classes here and there. I've helped to lead workshops. I didn't go to college for photography, though. I went to college for business administration and military science. Photography has always been my default. Like, I've always returned to photography and studied it for 25 years. I've been doing it professionally for 14 years. And I travel as a nude portrait photographer.
Nice. Okay. And so you mentioned, and so I do want to touch on all of those aspects of your story. And so the first thing you talked about is growing up in New York, and you were raised by your grandma.
Well, I grew up here. I was born in New York.
Oh, you grew up here?
Yes.
But you were born in New York. Okay,
yes,
great.
I moved here when I was 6, almost 7 years old.
So we claim you now. If that's how Savannah works. We claim you
Elementary, middle school, high school, college, all right here.
Okay, so you are from here. That's what we believe in Savannah. So tell me what it was like growing up for you. You said that you were raised by your grandma for a period of time. How was that?
Well, my entire life, like from 5 weeks old on, so a long period of time. It was great. I think we had our challenges. They're I guess you would call the normal things that would come with the generation gap that existed between the two of us, and my social disability. I grew up on the island. For the most part, I was the only Black kid, so that was really what stood out.
Yeah.
I didn't see color at first, and she always did, and she was always a little paranoid and anxious about how other people would treat me, or if they would accept me or not, would I fit in. And I always sort of just did my own thing. If someone didn't like my energy or whatever, I didn't always get it, so I just did my thing.
Yeah.
And I had my friends, and then there were people who picked on me, and I just found a way to keep moving.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that you have a social disability. When did you find out, like, when did you get your diagnosis?
I was 9 or 10 when I was diagnosed with Asperger's.
Okay.
Today it's been relabeled as ASD.
Yes.
And it's considered a disability. And I don't really consider it a disability. It's like more of a superpower. I think differently from other people.
Yeah.
And that helps me a lot with my photography, that it's all challenged into. But there are some things that go right over my head from time to time, but I eventually catch up.
Yeah. And so what was that like for you? You mentioned like just the going to school and especially living on the island, it being a predominantly white area, and almost for you, like it was just finding ways to manage. There were some things that were over your head. So maybe like things that your grandmother was concerned about just didn't land the same for you?
I think the first big challenge that, in the beginning did go right over my head was in elementary school. There was a little girl that lived across the street from me. And I say little girl, she and I were the same age. But in elementary school, and we lived across the street from each other, so we hung out a lot. We went to the community playground, roamed through the woods, the pool, your typical things that elementary school kids who live on an island do, biking everywhere. And the two of us, we never thought anything of it. We were just two innocent kids being kids. Until one day her grandmother found out, and it was hell. There were threats made that I didn't understand. There was a lot of screaming amongst the neighbors and the adults. And ultimately my grandmother came to me and was like, just stay away from her, leave them alone. It's not worth it. And she and I, we didn't leave each other alone. We were friends, we were kids. And she and I were even confused about it. But it was the grandmother was like, oh my God, my granddaughter's hanging out with this little brown boy. And I didn't get it.
Yeah.
Neither did she, and what elementary school kids should, sadly. And one thing led to another after that, and it's never really ended. In my adult life, there was another white girl, and she and I were just friends. We were going through the typical struggle of life. Was over at her house a lot. Her landlord didn't mind her having large groups of people over. And even if it got noisy, like we were having a barbecue or cookout, he didn't care until he saw me one day push through the group of everyone and like singled me out, yelling like I had no business being there with this girl or on the property at all. Wanted to call the police, stop the party, and everyone was shocked and confused, like what the hell is going on? Like he's our friend. Like he had no issues with everyone else there, but like I was an issue. But I was also the only Black person there, so everyone else clicked. No one really called it racism or anything in the moment, but that's what it was. And I think that the Asperger's kicks in because I'm Black, so what, right?
Yeah.
And having done nothing wrong, my first instinct is to challenge him. Like, yeah, I know that you're the landlord, this is your land, but you're renting the property to her. Why is it an issue for me to be here? And I've always challenged people like that. And if there was something to confront, I confronted it and I questioned it. I never just took no for an answer or yes for an answer. I always wanted to know why and try to understand what was going on.
Yeah. And so I see how for you that makes it not a disability, but almost like a superpower, because for you there is like almost this ability to question things because of the way you see the world. And for you, your worldview is like, I didn't do anything wrong, so like let's talk about it, versus, you know, as you were talking about that situation, it just went through my head of like, wow, how uncomfortable that must have been. But it sounds like it, even if it was uncomfortable for you, there was this sense of, well, no, we need to talk about this because this doesn't make sense. And so in school, so you mentioned that like that happened in elementary school, and that's also something that you've had happen in your life of being the Black person that, and especially being a Black man, of having almost like those weird moments of
there's another more interesting story that I had from high school that I think I can keep short if I can share it.
Yeah.
So there's this girl named Samantha, and she was an English girl. I had a thing for her, decided to ask her out for the dance. She said no at first, and it's like, okay, I got rejected, so what? Move on. And she and I were still friends. We still talked. We didn't have any issues with each other. And come to school a few days later, before homeroom, she's storming in with her mom, red-faced and in tears, storms right by me, like trying to figure out what's going on. It's like in like silence. Next thing I know, I'm being pulled into a room by the school security officers and a couple guidance counselors. They're stripping my camera bag, having me take off my shirt, and basically had me stripped down to my underwear, searching me. Wouldn't say why at first. They were looking for weapons. But I didn't know this at first. Then they brought Samantha, her mother, and my mother into the room. And that's when my mother found out what they had done, and obviously she was pretty pissed off about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they presented this little color-in that someone made, and it turned out another kid in the classroom who overheard me ask Samantha out and saw her reject me, decided to make this cartoon of me threatening to shoot Samantha, and gave that to her. And I think if someone thought their life was in danger, like, I would be pretty upset too.
Mm-hmm.
But it was all done just to try to scare and harass me. And we quickly figured out who was responsible, and everything was fine after that. At least between Samantha and I, or the parents, like, that was a different story.
Yeah.
But that was typical for me, though.
Yeah. I mean, how did that, like, affect you, though? Like, what was your thinking of just these culminations of incidents that have happened to you based off of either someone, like, blaming you, or because you're a Black man, or a Black child at the time? So how did that affect you?
I don't really know. I don't really have a straight answer.
Yeah.
I think it's given me thicker skin. There's not a lot that gets to me as easy anymore. Like, when I was younger, like, some things I responded to really immaturely. But I was young and I was dumb then, but it's like it kept happening. So eventually you become numb to it, and it's like, oh, this again. Yeah. Whatever. Let's move on.
Yeah. And so for you, the mode has been, just to keep moving forward, and then you're saying that, like, the repercussions of those things has been almost like a numbness, but then a thicker skin.
Yes.
Yeah. And so these kind of things are happening for you school wise. How is everything else happening for you in your life at this point in time of, like, elementary to high school, like, school aged?
High school, my friends knew me as the guy with the camera. Like, I literally went everywhere, and I was always trying to think of something to photograph. And, like, wherever we went, I had to stop to photograph. It was the one who would linger behind just to photograph the scene. And, like, if we were going to an event, someone would say, make sure you get pictures. Like, oh, we got that covered. Nick's coming with us.
Yeah.
And I've always been involved in the arts and in the museum. And I know how I got into nude photography. I'm not really sure how to connect the dots here to the point of high school.
Yeah.
But I decided when I was 18 years old, decided that I wanted to be a nude portrait photographer. Didn't really have a direction then like I do now. But when I came out publicly as a nude portrait photographer, a lot of people use that as an excuse. Oh my God, let's attack him for it. And I think there were 96 people who modeled nude for me before my first real issue with someone that completely blindsided me. Because the issue wasn't with the person who modeled nude for me. Her friends didn't like the fact that she modeled nude for me. So it was something along the lines of I was exploiting her. And then that turned into I was harassing her. And then making threats to her. And all the while, she and I didn't have any issues until I decided to confront her as like, hey, why is all this happening? And she didn't know how to respond. I didn't know how to deal with it. We were both 18, 19. And ultimately, we decided to stop speaking and move on. She never had an issue with any of the portraits that she agreed to do. She shared the portraits. She still has the portraits. She still uses the portraits today, more than like 14 years later. But that started this snowball effect that I missed in the moment. I didn't see what was happening there. And in 2014, it happened again. There was a girl who I met, had long red curly hair. It wasn't her natural hair color, but it was the basis of why I approached her. And she was also an artist. She did life drawing and sculpting. She asked if I would pose nude for her as well, and I said, sure, why not? And her mom was some high-powered attorney out in Seattle She did this thorough background check on me before she actually agreed to model nude for me and got permission from her mom to model nude for me after her mom checked me out. I was clueless to this at first.
Yeah.
And when I found out, instead of just being alone with her while we were going out, essentially doing guerrilla photography, going out at locations around downtown to do nude photography, and then on Hutchinson Island, where we had permission to photograph nude on the land, I asked her roommate to come with us, just so that there was a second person there. And her mom checked in every 30 minutes practically. And as far as I could tell, the shoot went fine. We spent the entire afternoon, the entire evening, at least 6 hours exploring around different locations, including her apartment, for portraits. I took my time to edit them. I got them back to her. She asked me to re-edit some things. And fast forward 3 months, we had plans to do 3 more shoots, and then me to pose for her twice. And the second shoot was supposed to be a group shoot with a larger group of women for a body image project. And when I approached her about it, it's like, hey, we're organizing this now. Are you still interested in being a part of this? Like, this is what we agreed to. She said she was going to think about it. She got back to me and decided she didn't want to. I said, okay, that's fine. That's your choice. I'm going to go find more people. And then she turned around and told me that she wanted the exclusive rights to all the portraits because of what so-and-so said. And that's when I stopped and said, no. It's like, you're breaking your agreement. That's one thing. You have a copy of all the portraits. And that at that point, she had put them on her website and on her social media and a few other places before I had. She asked first, like, and I said, yeah. So it's like, it was whatever. But the point was, she got a bunch of free photography from me. There was no money exchanged, and I knew that this was my work. And I had already, at that point in my life, had been taught not to let people bully me out of my work. My mother had already spent years at that point nagging on me. It's like, why are you doing more free photography? Why are you doing more free photography? You need to get paid for this. Yeah. And to me, I'm just like, I'm an artist. This is what I do. This is my passion. This is my life. Yes, it's expensive. But I said no. And that's when things started to go downhill. She blew up my phone. And I eventually just blocked her number. She blew up my Facebook. I blocked her on Facebook. She got her cousin to do the same, and then her 54-year-old uncle to do the same. And the uncle stepped in the picture and was like, wait, you're how old? You're acting like you're younger than her. So the police got involved. They saw all the texts. They saw and counted where I told her politely as possible before I started cursing her out to stop and leave me alone. We went to court. And at that point, the first court hearing, there were a bunch of people who were modeling nude for me and running to me and telling me that this girl is going from one classroom to another at SCAD, slandering my name, and people on Facebook reaching out to me. It's like, you need to sue her. You need to file a lawsuit. She's trying to trash your name. We know none of this is true. And at first, it's like, you all know it's not true, so why? And I didn't file a lawsuit against her, but we did go to court. The judge at first thought there was more to it because she started the court case by pointing out that she never felt sexually threatened by me. And she got permission to model nude for me from her mother, and everything was fine. So the judge was confused by that. And then the judge saw all the texts. So the judge ordered a further investigation to be done, which took 4 months before we returned to court, and it was determined that I was the victim in the picture. And there was nothing that was going to be done about it. And after that, this same person went to Reddit. And as people say, slander is the weapon of the loser. And that Reddit is still exploding today. And this was back in 2014. There are people who've used this Reddit thread as an excuse to launch, 5 or 6 different slander campaigns against me on Facebook. On social media. And as a photographer, it's like I depend on social media not just to promote my art, but my business and my profession is as a portrait photographer. I don't just do nude art. I depend on family portraits, boudoir sessions, wedding events. All of that just sunk at first. It's like it was just a bunch of attacks, and then hundreds of strangers coming at me like I'm some monster or animal going around raping people. And it slowed down over the at this point, but it still happens. There's still a great deal of people here in the Hispanic community who are complete strangers to me, who believe this just because a bunch of people said it.
Yeah.
It's like they saw something negative on Facebook. Let me jump on that. Oh, some black guy. He's a monster. Let's paint him as an even bigger monster. Meanwhile, there are hundreds of people who are still model nude for me across the coast. Like there's a little over 2,000 people at this point who have done multiple shoots with me as a nude artist, who've supported my work, who've helped to keep my work funded, including the Telefree Museums. I mean, the Telefree Museums hasn't funded me, but they've helped to support my work. And a lot of the people who've modeled for me have come to the art shows as well. And in my mind, it's like, well, people are saying this. Here's evidence that proves that it's BS. And here are all of these people who, despite this, are doing upwards of 20 different shoots with me. So if I was really this monster, rapist, pedophile, or whatever that you claim, why am I not in jail? And why instead am I still doing so much photography? And that speaks for itself.
Yeah. I mean, and even in what you were sharing, what I hear is that, I mean, since you were 18 years old, this is a passion of yours. But there's definitely been some challenges, whether it be misconceptions or things that people feel after the fact for whatever reason that people say the things they say. I think that it is easy to jump on tearing people down. It just is. I think it's a part of human nature, unfortunately. And so you've talked through the challenges, but what drew you to being an artist? So you had mentioned the thread between you and your grandfather being a photographer, but what drew you towards more of the art side of
before photography, before Savannah, my mother was an art collector and she was also a curator. So from as soon as I could walk and remember, I just remember being submerged in a culture of art, mostly painting and visual art. I don't know if it was MoMA or the Met, but my first impression of nude art was at one of those two museums. It was a giant painting, probably the size of this room, of this very voluptuous redheaded woman laying on a couch. I guess you would describe it as your paint me like your French lady and type of pose. But what I saw was this person who, at that age, society had deemed as unattractive, laying nude on this couch, as confident as all get out. And it's like, to me, that was real. And there's nude art everywhere else too, but it was that painting that really stood out to me at first. And I think that was the first impression of nude art that got me interested in nude art. And as I got older, I think I was 14 maybe 15, maybe a little younger. I saw a boy with curly hair. And I told my mother, mother, that I think I'm bi, because I like this curly hair. And it turned out that I just have a thing for anyone with curly hair. I'm completely straight, and but don't have anything against anyone who is. It's like teach their own. But my mother didn't feel the same way. It's like, oh my God, my son might be gay. Let me get him Playboy magazines. And a lot of people don't know this. I've mentioned it a few times on Facebook. But she paid for my Playboy subscription from that age through my freshman year of college. It's like, don't be gay, here, look at these magazines, type of thing. Yeah. Porn was a completely different story. It's like Playboy was okay, but porn, you're gonna get your ass beat. It's like, just like she was a strong woman herself, and she made sure that I didn't look at women as meat, so to speak, and that I always knew to respect and celebrate women, but to like women, so to speak, and not boys. And that was the biggest influence for nude art through my adolescent years. So when I was 18, it's like, it was a no-brainer. I'm going to be a nude portrait photographer. And Playboy was one of the bigger influences, but I didn't want to be a Playboy nude portrait photographer. I wanted to create art. And what I considered art. And while I thought Playboy was cool and like all the women were attractive, I considered it glamour photography. And there's an art to glamour portrait photography. And art to me has to express something and make people feel something. And it can be something as simply making someone feel confident in their own skin, which Playboy does, but Playboy doesn't tell a story with portraits. And that's what I'm more into, or at first, and that's where a lot of my art kind of took off and expanded. When I was younger, I didn't realize what I was signing up for as a nude portrait photographer. I was looking at the people who were modeling for me as subjects of my art.
Yeah.
And the Asperger's kicked in where I didn't think about the fact that these are people too.
Yeah.
This is someone or a bunch of people who have their own story, and everyone has their own insecurities about their bodies. In the beginning, I wasn't thinking about any of that. It all went right over my head. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with you to me. It's like, you're a perfect fit for what we're doing. Why are you worried about the stretch marks on your stomach or the little roll that you have here? And essentially asked me if I can be a plastic surgeon when I edit everything. And that's when I said, no, I don't want to be a plastic surgeon. Like, I want to keep everything as real as possible. And that's where my nude art took a direction into body positive nude portrait photography and trying to do more to keep everything as real and as natural as possible. Across everything. So there's the body image projects, there's my visual poetry projects, there's a long list of different portfolio projects that go in every different direction, including erotica today. But the underlying focus to everything has always been to keep it real, to portray these women as real women as they are, and not make them look like some sort of artificial Barbie doll or something like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love that, just even what you painted for us, that journey for you that kind of brought you to this place in your career. So tell me about the experience of working alongside, you said you've worked alongside Telfair. So what was that like?
So I never worked for Telfair. I'm a part of the Friends of African American Art Association.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Which is an art association that my mother helped to start. But it's an art association that's aimed at promoting Black artists in Black art. And I'm a Black artist. So I've always been a member of FAAA, and FAAA is a part of the Telfair Museums. And that's how my art shows with FAAA at the Telfairs happened. I've also been a member of the Savannah Art Association. I joined the Savannah Art Association in high school. There's been a long period of time where I wasn't actively involved, but that was the first art association that I joined as a member, and the first group in Savannah where I publicly displayed my photography in. Through the Telfair Museums, I've also done art shows at Savannah State University. There was an art show that was done at Gallery Espresso, but that was done completely independent of any art association. That was between me and the owners of Gallery Espresso, using their gallery as a gallery.
Nice. Okay. No, I love that, what you just described. And so you said your mom helped found that association. And so what does that association do?
It's FAAA helps to bring Black artists together, and it helps to promote diversity among the Black community and with their art, if that makes more sense.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. No, I love that. I had no idea that was here. And so what you were saying is that it's associated with the Telfair and they do art shows through there. Nice.
So the FAAA has an annual show at the Telfair every year. And we also have an annual show at Savannah State University. The annual show at Savannah State University is currently up right now with 2 of my portraits, along with amazing art from several other artists. Can I mention one of the other artists?
Sure.
Or a couple of the artists? Sharona Raid, Calvin Woodman, and Kareem Michael are 3 other artists whose work I really admire. And they all have art in the same art show with me at Savannah State University. And I'll be up until the end of March. And then the next FAAA art show will be in the fall. When, I'm not sure, but it's always in the fall, sometime between September and October or November. And that show will be at the Jefferson Center Museum. And as individual artists, we do art shows elsewhere on our own independently, but we're a community and we're always promoting each other.
No,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that brings me a lot of joy. I'll definitely have to be on the lookout for that. I love that there is an association that's working to build more diversity and be able to have more diversity in the art world, and especially be able to display your art. I think that's great. And so as we've talked about what it was like growing up for you. We've talked about just your diagnosis, growing up in a predominantly white space, just bullying that you encountered as a child, but even bullying in your career. And so what do you wish people knew about, I guess, even some of those areas? So what do you wish people knew about your career? What do you wish people understood?
I think it's something that they do understand already, and some people are just in denial about it because I'm an easy target. And in that sense, like, I'm not the only person on the planet doing nude portrait photography and trying to make a living from it. Like, this is my career and day job. It's not just a hobby. So yes, I expect to be paid for my work, but I'm not in it purely for the money. I'm not out trying to exploit the bodies of women. Sure, there's some people who I'm more interested in working with than others for whatever reason, but the ultimate goal is to show my work and to make a living. And the people who work with me are people who choose to work with me, and people who choose to work with me, they know what they're signing up for, so to speak. Just like if you go choose to work at McDonald's, you know that you're signing up to make burgers for a living. My career is centered around working with people in their bodies. So I guess I really want people to look for the truth, and not believe everything they hear just because one person said it or because it's a popular opinion. And I guess it goes to understand that there's three sides to every story. There's their side, my side, and the truth that's in the middle. It's like I can point out what I think is obvious all day long, but that's obvious from my perspective. What's obvious from your perspective might be completely different from my perspective. So you need to step back and just reevaluate everything for a little bit and look for the truth.
Yeah. No, and I mean, and that makes sense to me, just even as I've listened to your story of how looking for all perspectives would just be of such value, because, you know, being the things that you've encountered growing up, the things that you've encountered in your career, it can be disheartening. And so what I'm glad to hear from you is that some of these instances have made you stronger and have sharpened your perception of things, because even as you were sharing some of the challenges, some of the things just didn't dawn on you that this could be a problem, just because we've had the conversation and now how did this escalate to something so huge. But I do appreciate what you're saying here of what you wish people would know and even understand is the importance of perspective, the importance of even understanding that this is something that you do that's a passion, and this is something that you care about, and it's a career choice and not necessarily something that you're just doing as a hobby or for fun or for any alternative motives. And I think that's just something important too. That's a big reason of why we do this podcast, is that knowing people's stories make a difference. And sometimes if we're not careful, we can kind of bring our story into someone else's. So we can bring our lens into someone else's work, into someone else's thing, but not even considering the fact, well, maybe they don't see it the way I do, or maybe they're not working with the same set of tools that I'm working with. And so I appreciate what you said just now.
And that doesn't go to dismiss that I work in a world, I do nude photography with men too, but my photography is catered almost entirely around women, and it is nude portrait photography. And we do live in a world where we're still fighting for justice for women and to appreciate women as people, not sex objects. And if you turn on the TV, most of what you see is over-sexualized everything, where women are being sexually exploited to sell a product for the most part, if you boil things down. And it's, some of the people attack me. It's like, okay, it's okay if this other woman is doing the exact same thing that I'm doing because she's a woman. She's photographing nude women, and it's powerful because she's a woman. Well, I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm just a boy or a guy, and I have different parts between my legs. But we have the exact same objectives, exact same goals, reaching the same results with the same intentions. So why is it different for her than me just because of her gender? And how is that not sexist? And there are horrible, crappy, really shady, sleazy people out there in the photography world. So most of my shoots are out in nature. It's typical that if you were to boil away the context and kind of just paint it as blandly as possible, I go out into the middle of the woods with naked girls and we do photography. And while on a shoot, my mother called me and told me there's this guy on CNN who found these 2 girls in Muddle Mayhem, took them out into the middle of the woods to do a shoot, and he chopped them up. And it's that fear that is realistic, that I understand, that some people are coming with when they try to attack or when they have concerns. A lot of the concerns aren't baseless, but they're being projected where they don't need to be projected to, if that makes more sense.
Yeah. And I hear what you're saying too, is some of that can be resolved through conversations as opposed to assumptions. And I think that is the hard part, is that the stories that we have in our minds is just really, it can be hard to overcome that and actually have a conversation with someone, instead of assuming that because I see, because I see that you're Black, I see that you're a man, and I see that your career, I need to be careful not to just walk away and say XYZ or walk away with any assumptions, because it is easy, just like you were saying, to have those assumptions based off of, well, if it's a woman, then it's fine. If it's a guy, then it's wrong. If you're doing this, like if you're doing nude photography, surely you're doing it for a reason that is exploitive instead of empowering. So I think that it is just difficult. And like, definitely with your career, I can see how it's difficult to see it as art and see it as a passion and not. But like what you're saying is, sometimes those things can be resolved by just talking to someone and getting to know them and understanding where they're coming from.
Right.
No, well, I really appreciate you coming in today and having this conversation with us and sharing your story and sharing the challenges and the things that you love about your work. And we end every podcast with a challenge. And so what would your challenge be to the listeners?
I mentioned this earlier. My challenge would be for people to not be gullible, and to look for the truth. If you hear something that seems negative and horrible, it's like, listen to it, take in the details, but don't rush to react to it. Go to the other side, look for the rest of the details, and cross the details across each other and see what's really what makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, then question, is it really true? And look for the truth. Don't just believe what you hear just because it's popular, or you heard it from your friend, or even your religious leaders. Look for the truth. Yeah. Don't be afraid to question things.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. I appreciate that challenge of looking for the truth. And again, thank you so much for coming in and having this discussion with us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so, listeners, this is goodbye. We'll talk to you next time. Later.